Imagine a target, 100,000 tons of American steel, $13 billion, 75 aircraft, 4,500 sailors, sitting 200 miles off a hostile coastline. To the enemies of America, the USS Gerald R. Ford looks like the perfect prize. Big, slow, unmissable. But what they don't realize is this: they aren't looking at a target. They are staring into a honeypot, designed to lure them into extinction. They've developed hypersonic missiles for exactly this scenario. The DF-26, the Zircon. Projectiles that scream through the atmosphere at Mach 10, 7,000 miles per hour. In theory, nothing can stop them. In theory, one missile turns the Ford into the most expensive artificial reef in history. But here is what those armchair generals on the internet keep getting wrong. They ask the question, can a missile sink an aircraft carrier? That is the wrong question. The real question is this: why would firing a missile at the USS Ford be the last thing you ever do? Most people assume carriers are sitting ducks, big, slow, defenseless. The reality is the exact opposite. These ships don't wait to get hit, they hunt the hunters. And today we are breaking down exactly why the Ford isn't a target. It is a trap, baited with American power. Here is what we are covering. First, the historical proof that these ships are nearly impossible to sink. Second, the invisible electronic fortress that blinds incoming threats. And third, why launching one missile reveals your position to 90 aircraft. That will erase you from the map in 15 minutes. Let's start with a lesson, written in fire. Here is what most people don't realize. The Navy has already tried to sink these ships, and they failed. January 14, 1969. The USS Enterprise, America's first nuclear carrier. At 0819 hours, a Zuni rocket overheats on the flight deck and detonates. The explosion triggers a chain reaction that naval architects had feared for decades. Within 9 minutes, 18 500-pound bombs cook off on the deck. Think about that for a second. 18 bombs, not small firecrackers. Mark 82 bombs designed to level buildings, each one shaking the 93,000-ton ship to its steel bones. The flight deck is breached. Burning jet fuel cascades into the lower decks. Temperatures hit 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Steel begins to warp. Any other ship on Earth would have broken apart and sunk within the hour. But the Enterprise didn't stop. The captain maneuvered the ship to vent the smoke. The crew fought the Inferno for hours with nothing but fire hoses and raw courage. The ship survived. She returned to Pearl Harbor under her own power, was repaired, and went back to war. That was 1960s technology. That was the old steel. Now let's talk about the modern test. In 2005, the Navy needed to dispose of the USS America, a decommissioned carrier from the 60s. Instead of towing her to a scrapyard, they decided to use her for weapons testing. They wanted to know exactly what it would take to sink a carrier. Do the math with me. The Navy spent 4 weeks pounding that ship with everything short of a nuke. Cruise missiles, torpedoes, planted C4 charges. They hit her above the waterline and below. They detonated explosives inside the hull. 4 solid weeks of unrestricted violence against an empty, broken vessel. The USS America finally sank on May 14, 2005. But she didn't go down easy. She absorbed punishment that would have destroyed an entire fleet of modern warships. So when someone tells you that 2 Chinese hypersonic missiles are going to sink the USS Ford, remind them of this. If it took 4 weeks to sink a 1960s-era carrier with unrestricted access, what chance does a single missile salvo have against a ship built with 5 decades of advancement? But that is just the physical armor. The real protection is something you can't see. The USS Gerald R. Ford doesn't rely on steel to survive. It relies on electrons. Embedded in the ship's superstructure is the SLQ-32 V6 electronic warfare system. This isn't a defensive tool. This is an offensive weapon that fights in the electromagnetic spectrum. When a hostile radar tries to paint the Ford, the SLQ-32 doesn't just detect it. It analyzes the frequency, identifies the threat type, and then floods that radar with false data. To the incoming missile, the Ford suddenly appears to be in 12 different locations at once, or it disappears entirely. The missile's brain gets scrambled, its guidance system fails. It dives into empty ocean miles away from the real target. This is called a soft kill. No explosions, no dramatic interceptions. The missile just misses, and the Ford never breaks stride. To the enemy radar, the USS Ford becomes an electronic ghost. Now you see it, now you don't. And you can't kill what you can't find. But let's say a threat burns through the jamming. The Ford has a backup plan. The Nulka active decoy. This is a hovering rocket drone that launches from the deck and positions itself away from the ship. It amplifies its radar signature to appear larger and hotter than the carrier itself. Picture this. The hypersonic missile is screaming toward the Ford at Mach 10. In the final seconds, it detects what looks like an enormous heat source 3 miles to the left. Its programming tells it to go for the bigger target. It changes course. It destroys a $100,000 drone, while the $13 billion carrier continues its mission. Now, here is where it gets really impressive. The Ford doesn't fight alone. It is the centerpiece of a carrier strike group. Through the CEC network, the Ford shares a single tactical picture with every ship in the group. An Arleigh Burke destroyer 50 miles ahead detects a threat on its radar. The Ford immediately sees that data. A cruiser 50 miles to the rear launches an interceptor based on the Ford's targeting solution. The ships function as one organism, with a nervous system that spans hundreds of miles of ocean. This is what the critics miss when they talk about carrier vulnerability. They see one ship. They ignore the integrated kill web protecting it. But here is the part that should terrify any adversary. Let's say you are a military commander sitting in a mobile launcher deep inland. You have decided to take a shot at the USS Ford. You launch your hypersonic missile. Congratulations. You have just signed your own death warrant. Because the moment you fire that missile, a massive infrared flare appears on US satellites. You have revealed your position. And the Ford is not alone. It is the head of a Hydra. First, the air wing. Within minutes, F-35C, Lightning IIs are airborne. These aren't just fighters. They are stealth sensor nodes that can penetrate your airspace undetected. They don't just find you, they relay your exact GPS coordinates to the entire fleet. And this is where the silent assassin comes in. While you are scanning the sky for jets, you forgot to look at the ocean. Lurking off your coast is a Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine. It doesn't need to surface. It doesn't need to see you. Receiving the targeting data from the F-35s, it opens its vertical launch tubes. A salvo of Tomahawk land attack missiles erupts from beneath the waves. These aren't torpedoes. These are precision cruise missiles capable of hitting a specific window in your command bunker from 1,000 miles away. You are now being hunted from the sky and the sea simultaneously. Your grid square is about to be erased by a coordinated strike of JDAM bombs from above and Tomahawks from below. The Ford doesn't get mad, it gets even. And it does it with surgical precision. This establishes the hierarchy of the battlefield. The missile launcher is the prey. The carrier strike group is the apex predator. And the food chain is non-negotiable. This is the predator dynamic that people miss. The Ford isn't sitting there waiting to take a punch. It is baiting you into revealing yourself, so it can hunt you down. And here is what makes the Ford even more dangerous than the old Nimitz-class carriers. It can generate 33% more sorties per day. That is the power of the EMALS system, the electromagnetic catapults that replaced the old steam launchers. Think of it this way. The old carriers were like loading a musket. One shot, reload, one shot. The Ford is like a machine gun. It launches aircraft faster, recovers them faster, and turns them around faster. In the first 24 hours of a conflict, the Ford delivers vastly more firepower than its predecessors. The advanced weapons elevators move 24,000 pounds of bombs and missiles from the magazine to the flight deck at 150 feet per minute. That is 50% faster than the old hydraulic systems. While the enemy is still reloading, the Ford has already delivered 3 more strikes. Now, let's talk about your return on investment. Usually, when the government builds something new, it gets fatter, slower, and more expensive. The USS Ford breaks that rule. Because of automation, this ship cuts out the most expensive part of the budget, the bloat. It requires 600 fewer sailors than the old Nimitz class. Think about what that means for your tax receipt. That is 600 fewer salaries to pay, 600 fewer mouths to feed, 600 fewer pensions to fund. Over the ship's life, that puts $4 billion back into the system. The Ford is the first carrier in history designed to respect the taxpayer's wallet. You aren't just buying a warship, you are buying the leanest, most efficient instrument of American power ever built. So when someone complains about the $13 billion price tag, tell them this: you can pay $13 billion for a carrier to keep the peace, or you can pay trillions for a world war. The choice is simple. So why is firing a missile at the USS Ford a suicide mission? Because it is built on 5 decades of lessons written in fire and blood. Because it operates inside an electronic fortress. And because the moment you reveal your position, 90 aircraft turn your location into a memory. The critics call it a sitting duck. We call it the hammer of God. History has proven it. From the fires of 1969 to the bombardment of 2005, these ships simply refuse to die. Today's carriers are stronger, smarter, and deadlier. The narrative that they are obsolete is a fantasy sold by adversaries who cannot match American naval power. This ship is 100,000 tons of floating sovereignty. It allows the president to project American will anywhere on the globe without asking for permission. That is not just engineering. That is freedom. This ship isn't just hull number 78. It is a 100,000-ton guarantee. It exists to ensure that when an ally calls for help, the answer isn't a diplomatic letter. The answer is 90 aircraft arriving at max speed. That is the difference between a promise and protection. Why does America stand alone at this summit? Because a ship like this cannot be simply built. It must be forged. It demands an industrial base that is the envy of the world. It requires technological supremacy. And above all, it requires the audacity to project power where others only offer excuses. We don't ask for likes for the algorithm. We ask for a vote of confidence. If you believe that peace through strength is still the only way to keep the free world safe, hit that like button right now. The headlines tell you to be afraid. We tell you the truth. Remember, the U.S. Navy isn't worried, and neither should you be. This is Navy Decoded. We don't deal in fear, we deal in firepower. Sleep well, the watch is set.